The search committee had been working diligently for almost a year. They had met regularly, reading the relocation papers of clergy, which is quite a task. Some clergy can be rather wordy. The committee had listened to countless of sermons, which is quite a task. I don't know if you know this or not, but some clergy can be wordy. And from time to time, this committee would attempt to stealthily infiltrate worship services to listen to possible candidates, trying their best to go undetected, which is easier said than done. So one by one, sorting through the list, they began to whittle it down. Phone interviews, then person to person. Finally, the top candidate emerged and conversations began. The committee was rather hopeful, and they greatly anticipated the day when white smoke would once again ascend to the heavens. But there was a caveat. From the beginning, the candidate was up front about the possibility of being called to another church, a church located out of state that was close to family. If they extended the call, he would go. They extended the call, and he went, leaving the committee with the empty almost. It was time for them to start again. In the meantime, all of this that was going on, a phone call was made to the regional office in the Christian Church, Disciples of Christ. And the purpose of the call was to see if I could still have my name submitted to a congregation that had asked if I was interested. And at the time, I said no, but I had been in Allen for 8 years, and I was feeling the need to move. And so I called and said, "Is it too late?" And he said, "No." He said, "But if you're really interested in moving, I want to tell you about a congregation." He says, "The type of congregation, if I weren't regional staff, I would be interested in." He said, "I'm meeting with them." He told me what had happened. He said, "I'm meeting with them actually tomorrow." Would be a Tuesday. I said, "Sure." Tuesday evening, I received a phone call from Alan Mace, the regional or associate regional minister, and he told me that the search committee was interested and that more than likely I would be getting a call to set up a phone interview. Wednesday morning, the phone rang. It was Phil Lane. He was the chair of the committee. At the end of the conversation, we'd agreed to a phone interview the following Tuesday, which, if you are keeping up with time, was only a week since they had met me on paper. The interview went well, at least I thought. Wednesday morning, the phone rang. It was Phil. He wanted to set up a time when Nancy and he could come to Allen and attend worship and have lunch. I said, "What are you doing Sunday?" At lunch, Phil extended an invitation to come to St. Angelo and to meet with the entire search committee. I asked, "Well, what are you doing this coming Thursday?" Again, if you're keeping up with the timeline from paper to person, it had only been 16 days. We met in the church library, and after the awkward hellos and nice to meet yous, we sat down, and I remember asking the question, "Are we desperate or are we in love?" All in the room knew the answer. Only time will tell. That was on a Thursday night. Saturday afternoon, the phone rang, and Phil offered me the position contingent on the board approval and then the congregational call, and I accepted. This past couple of weeks, I've been cleaning out my office, and I found that the original letter of call, signed by Phil Lane, chair of the search committee, signed by Greg Gossett, moderator, I never signed it. This is a mulligan, do-over. May the 2nd, 1993 was my first Sunday as the 26th senior minister of this congregation. And I invite those who were members of this church at that time. Would you please stand? You've had endured more than anybody. Thank you. The sermon text was 1 Corinthians 13, 1 through 8a, the same passage I chose today. It's where we began and it is where we will end. In this inaugural sermon, I remember stating that in part I had come to receive your new members, to dedicate your babies, to baptize the believers, to marry the lovers, and to bury your dead. So if you would indulge me for a moment, and you can hold your applause, if you would just indulge me for a moment, if you became a member of this congregation after May the 2nd, 1993, would you rise? Thank you. You may be seated. If I dedicated one of your children, or you, and you know it, would you stand? Thank you. If I baptized you, would you stand? Thank you. If I married you, would you stand? Thank you. If I did your funeral, I was just checking. I was just seeing if you were listening. But if I did officiate at one of your loved one's funeral, a memorial service, would you please stand? Thank you. This is why today is so bittersweet. As Christ's representative, you invited me to share in significant moments of your lives. And I'm so grateful and have been so honored. And I thank you. Going back to my first sermon, I also remember a story that I told. I was in seminary at Bright Divinity School, and it was my year of supervision. And part of the requirement was to meet once a week to talk with a group of 5 from the congregation about how things are going with the church. And it was a wonderful experience. And we were at the last meeting. We had finished the year. And so I just asked the following question. I said, what in a minister, what quality do you think is the most important? They began to take turns. One said preaching. It's important that he or she be a good preacher. Nothing's worse in church than a boring preacher who just goes on and on and on. I don't know if you know this or not, but some clergy can be wordy. A good pastor, another said, it's important that he or she visit the sick, the shut-ins, and offers care for its members. Administration, said the other, we need to know what's going on. Teaching was high on another's list. The minister is the trained and resident theologian. He or she has been to seminary and therefore needs to teach the fundamentals of the faith. And finally, it was Albus Story's turn to speak. He was the oldest in the room. He said, well, I think what has been shared so far is well and good. All that's been said is important. But to me, what's important, the most important, is that when I look up there on Sunday morning, I know that the person behind that pulpit loves me. If I speak in the tongues of mortals, and of angels, but do not have love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give away all my possessions, and if I hand over my body so that I may boast but do not have love, I gain nothing. The type of love which the Apostle Paul is writing of goes beyond romance and relationships. For Paul is speaking of a love that is of God and from God. It is this love, God's love, that Paul defines as patient and kind. God's love is not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. It doesn't insist in its own way, and it's not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but rejoices in the truth. It is God's love that bears all things and believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. It is God's love that is eternal, that is never ending. I asked long ago, are we desperate or are we in love? So what does time now tell? For the most part, we have been in love. We've acted in love, given and received in love, spoken our truth in love, laughed and cried in love, teased and joked in love, and yes, even disagreed, argued, and downright fought in love. A love that is of God and from God. An amazing kind of love that is best understood in Jesus. An amazing kind of love that is best expressed and lived into when we follow the way of Jesus. There have been times, or have there been times when I have failed you? Yes, I know it, and so do you. And have there been times when you have failed me? Yes, you know it, and so do I. But as Bob Ballantyne used to say to me over and over again, love does not keep score. Because when we are founded in God's love, we find a way to forgive. When we are bound together in God's love, we find a way to once again get back on track. When we are secure in God's love, we risk loving even more. Our first conversation together began on a Tuesday afternoon, 5:30. Introductions were made. Phil Lane, Pat Holt, Keith Long, Dorothy Howerton, Martha Lou Dixon, Tim Archer, Linda Westbrook, Joe Henderson. They were the best of friends. They had to be. For the first 6 months of my preaching here, they all sat together on the very back row, right by the exit door. Took me a while to figure that one out. I had a week to do my homework for the interview, and I was prepared. I mean, I was so prepared, I had forgotten to prepare for Bible study later that evening at 7 p.m. We were studying the book of Acts. Walking into the classroom, I felt unprepared. I also felt unraveled. I felt undone because something began to stir in me during that phone interview, something that I believed to be God. I knew it was only a matter of time as I sat down before I would be saying goodbye to those people that I loved. The lesson that evening was from the 20th chapter of Acts. Paul is in Ephesus. He calls an elders' meeting to announce his departure. He's leaving them, he's headed to Jerusalem, and Paul says to them as I'm reading, "And now I know that none of you among whom I have gone proclaiming the kingdom of God will ever see my face again." It gets worse. When he had finished speaking, he knelt down with them all and prayed. There was much weeping among them all. They embraced Paul and kissed him, grieving especially because of what he had said. that he would not see them again. Then they brought him to the ship. And there I sat. And now I stand. Knowing that the ship is about to sail once more as we depart in love. In the same love that brought us together. This amazing love of God, who is already at work, preparing for a new day when you will fall in love again. Amen.